It was a routine flight between Moscow and Geneva, a daily journey that linked two major capitals, centers of power that seemed to come from radically opposed worlds. Moscow, with its imperial grandeur and its atmosphere of geopolitical tension, against Geneva, symbol of neutrality and international diplomacy. However, today, these two worlds came together in the sober elegance of an airliner. The two cities had nothing in common except their central place on the world stage, and this plane, which seemed to be a bridge between them, carried with it all this dichotomy. The Boeing 777, a giant of the sky, seemed like a flying city. Inside, first class was a true masterpiece of luxury, designed for those who didn't have to worry about money. The space was so vast that one wondered whether it was really an airplane or a five-star hotel lobby. The beige leather seats, of absolute comfort, were spaced as if each passenger had their own kingdom, with precious wood tables worthy of the largest living rooms. The deep blue curtains filtered the natural light that poured through the portholes, creating an intimate, almost mysterious atmosphere. The discreet lighting further accentuated this feeling of hushed luxury. The air was scented with delicate ambient scents, a blend of orchids and precious woods, almost imperceptible, but adding a touch of subtle sophistication. The passengers, all from the highest circles of the elite, exchanged furtive glances, aware of the privilege of their place, but also of the discretion required in this world of money and power. Among them, a man in his 40s stood with arrogant ease. Gregory Melnik, a businessman whose name circulated in the most secretive financial circles, sat, visibly at ease. His crisp, precisely tailored grey suit was designed by one of London's most renowned tailors. The solid gold watch on his wrist flashed with every gesture, reflecting in the dim light of the cabin like a promise of wealth and influence. His sunglasses, placed on the edge of the table, were a sign of his discreet arrogance, his gaze protected from the gaze of others. Melnik did not need to shine with his conversation. He shone with what he represented: a selfish success, based on high-flying deals, dubious transactions in the shadow of the major international financial markets. The world admired him from a distance, but he himself had no respect for the rules that governed others. He lived in a parallel world, where the laws of morality did not apply, where money was the only rule that counted. Next to him, in the shadow of his presence, was a more discreet man. Of average height, dressed in a simple, unspectacular dark suit, he seemed almost invisible, but there was something in his eyes that worried him. His dark, inscrutable eyes seemed to observe every movement around him, analyzing and filtering every noise, every word, every gesture. His impassive face, as if carved from stone, exuded an aura of discreet but indisputable authority. This man, silent, absorbed in his own thoughts, was the perfect example of the discretion that real power requires. Gregory Melnik, so sure of himself, believed himself superior, and yet he had not even bothered to ask himself who this man really was. He glanced at her absent-mindedly from time to time, but he didn't try to find out more, too absorbed in his own concerns to notice that his neighbor didn't look like him. If Melnik had known the truth, he might have shivered with icy fear, but he had no idea. This man, modest in his appearance but formidable in his silence, was Vladimir Putin. The president of Russia, without frills, without ostentatious pomp, traveled with ease among the other passengers. He neither needed recognition nor the comfort of special treatment. He preferred the discretion of a business-class flight, away from the eyes of the world, and he had the ability to go unnoticed where others would have been instantly recognized. What was a simple routine for him became part of a grand strategy game. Melnik, accustomed to speaking loudly in elite circles, believed himself immune from the consequences of his words. He had exchanged a few words with his neighbor without paying attention to his stature or his silence. He was one of those who saw only what they wanted to see, and to him, a man in a sober suit, without ostentatious jewelry or outward signs of wealth, could only be a minor diplomat or an unimportant state official. The conversation, at first banal, quickly drifted towards politics. Melnik, confident, could not resist the urge to show his expertise, especially on such a hot topic. "Frankly, this Putin," he said with a contemptuous grin, "he's a tyrant, a dictator. Who can still believe that he is capable of leading after all he has done at home and abroad?" He glanced furtively at his neighbor, looking for a reaction, but the man remained impassive. Encouraged by this lack of response, he continued, as if giving a private lecture. It's always the same problem with these men. They cling to power like leeches. But one day or another, reality catches up with them. He laughs, satisfied with his own comment, half to make himself feel important, half to test the limits of political correctness. He knew that in some circles his words would be applauded, but in others they could be risky. However, he feared nothing. He was untouchable. He turned towards the window, smiling even more, as if he had just made a brilliant statement.
The plane flew above the clouds, majestic, unfathomable, as if nothing said on board mattered to the outside the world.
But the silence that followed was heavy.
Not ordinary silence. No.
A dense, heavy silence, charged with a dull tension that even Melnick, in all his arrogance, could not completely ignore. A few passengers around him exchanged worried glances, some looking down at their newspapers or screens, pretending not to have heard. The air in the cabin seemed thicker suddenly, as if the air pressure itself had changed. Gregory shrugged his shoulders. He had already made more daring statements in cozy salons in Geneva or London, and nothing had ever happened to him. He leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms with open indifference. But then his neighbor stood up. Slowly, methodically. He adjusted his jacket with a precise, measured gesture. His face betrayed nothing, not even a glimmer of emotion. Only a cold determination seemed to inhabit him. He took a few steps down the aisle, calmly heading towards the cockpit. Gregory followed the man with his gaze, intrigued but still unaware of what had just happened. He leaned slightly towards his neighbor on the left and whispered, with a smirk on his lips, "Guys like him don't understand anything about democracy." Half an hour later, the plane began its descent towards Geneva. However, unlike other flights, no usual announcement was made regarding the imminent arrival. The passengers, accustomed to these routines, began to observe unusual movements among the crew. The flight attendants seemed more tense than usual, their smiles more fixed, their gestures hasty. There was an air of nervousness in the cabin, as if something unexpected was about to happen. Gregory Melnick, in his leather chair, stood up to stretch, oblivious to the turn events were taking. He was absorbed in his thoughts and reflections on the conversation he had just had. He had made a bold statement, and it still amused him. After all, everyone knew that Russian politics was just a power game, right? He figured he would have a good topic for discussion at his next social dinner. The plane finally lands on the runway of Geneva Airport. The air was cool, and the soft evening light bathed the exterior in a pale gold color. The wheels of the Boeing 777 touched the ground with a certain smoothness, but the atmosphere in the plane was far from as calm. Passengers began to observe unusual movements among the crew. One of them glanced furtively into the cabin, before rushing towards the cockpit, looking in a hurry. Another whispered something in the ear of the purser, who nodded, her expression serious. Gregory paid no attention, getting up to retrieve his briefcase. Everything seemed normal, or at least that's what he thought. The murmurs in the cabin turned into more distinct noises, the noises one makes when one is about to welcome a distinguished visitor. But Melnick did not yet understand that this visitor was the one he had publicly insulted. When the plane parked in its final position and the gangplank unfolded, a group of bodyguards in black suits appeared on the tarmac. Their imposing, almost intimidating presence immediately caught the attention of those still in their seats. The guards stood straight, motionless, watching every movement. A convoy of dark limousines waited not far from the plane, their headlights on, illuminating the smooth asphalt of the runway. Gregory, still clueless, got up and headed towards the exit, absent-mindedly checking to make sure his luggage was stowed in the compartment above him. But he had not noticed the furtive glances that met around him, nor the passengers who were whispering among themselves while observing the security deployment. To his surprise, a group of journalists suddenly rushed towards the plane, their cameras ready to capture every moment. Flashes crackled through the air, dazzling those standing nearby. Melnick instinctively turned to see what was attracting the reporter's attention. his face marked with irritation at the unexpected commotion. And that's when he saw the man in a dark suit walking calmly in front of him, surrounded by bodyguards. He walked slowly, his gait almost serene, while his protectors followed his every step with military precision. Gregory, still immersed in his confusion, watched him walk away, his mind trying to identify this mysterious man. But it was only then that he noticed the word President, written in gold letters on the suits of the bodyguards escorting the man. His heart leapt in his chest. A wave of realization hit him. The face of the man in question, until then anonymous to him, was instantly etched in his memory. He knew it now. He had just insulted the President of Russia himself.
The moment of truth came like a bolt from the blue.
A member of the crew, after a heavy silence, finally spoke into the intercom. The President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, you have now arrived in Geneva.
The name rang like a death knell in the cabin.
Gregory's world collapsed beneath his feet. His heart raced as the room seemed to close in on him. He felt heat invade his face, his stomach knotting. The President of Russia, the one he had just insulted so openly, was the one he had ignorantly despised. The group of journalists immediately turned towards him, their cameras trained on his now red face with shame. The flashes crackled at a frenetic pace, capturing every detail of his confused and anguished expression. Reality had caught up with him with a brutal blow. The tension in the cabin rose a notch, and a murmur ran through the crowd of passengers. Some looked at Melnik with a mixture of amusement and disgust, others simply seemed disinterested, but none of them could ignore the scene that was unfolding. Journalists approached him, asking questions he never imagined he would have to face. But he couldn't answer anymore. He was paralyzed, trapped in his own arrogance, unable to find the words to apologize, to justify his words. His legs shook slightly as he took a step back, his face marred with confusion and panic. The crowd around him waited for a reaction, a gesture on his part, but Melnik stood frozen, guilt overwhelming any attempt at pride. I didn't know. Gregory stammered, his trembling voice betraying the fear that was gripping him. He looked around in panic, hoping to find a familiar face, an ally, someone who would help him. But the passengers, once distracted, now stared at him with a mixture of amazement and amusement. Some murmured among themselves, escaping muffled snickers. The air was filled with an almost palpable tension. Desperate, he rushed towards a member of the crew, clumsily trying to justify himself. I didn't know it was him. I would never have. But his interlocutor, impassive, gave him a cold look and looked away, ignoring him superbly. Gregory felt his stomach twist. Before he could react further, one of the bodyguards, a colossus with a closed face, simply nodded. In an instant, Gregory found himself pushed aside from the exit. His body turned slightly to the side by a firm, authoritative hand. This gesture, although measured, carried with it an undeniable meaning. He was not welcome in this procession. As the passengers descended under the watchful eye of the cameras, Gregory understood that he was no longer in control of the situation. He tried to blend into the crowd, to move away discreetly, but it was already too late. He had become the involuntary center of attention he never wanted. In the airport hall, a heavy silence fell over the assembly.
Camera flashes lit up the scene like lightning on a stormy night.
The echo of whispers and clicks of cameras echoed against the glass walls. Gregory, out of breath, hurriedly headed towards the exit. He had to escape, leave this place, find the anonymity he cherished so much. But to his horror, he found the doors closed. A security guard stood there, looking unfazed, as if he had anticipated his attempt. He was trapped. A group of journalists approached, microphone held out, their eyes amused and eager. Mr. Melnik, how do you feel after insulting Vladimir Putin in first class? Said a reporter with a touch of irony. Did you really think he was just a passenger? Do you have any regrets? Gregory opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His mind was racing, overwhelmed by the pressure of the moment. He attempted a tense smile, hoping to defuse the situation, but his face betrayed his uneasiness. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin moved forward with measured, imperturbable steps, as if all this agitation did not concern him. His bodyguards escorted him with the rigor of a well-regulated clock, leaving no room for improvisation. He didn't even glance at Gregory. This scathing indifference was undoubtedly the worst humiliation. He didn't even deserve a word, a look, a reaction. Nothing. In the hours that followed, Gregory Melnik's story went around the world. A video, taken by an indiscreet passenger, showed the exact moment he realized his monumental mistake. The clip went viral on social media. The comments poured in. "Look at this guy. He really thought he could insult a president without facing consequences. Arrogance in all its splendor. A businessman who thought he was untouchable." The media were not left out. Every news channel picked up on the incident, some sarcastically headlined, "The man who humiliated Putin, and who ended up humiliated."
Gregory Melnik, from the top of the world to international scam in one flight.
His mailbox was flooded with messages. Some were mockeries, others reproaches. His business partners began to distance themselves. The image he had carefully constructed, that of a powerful and influential man, was crumbling under the weight of ridicule. Gregory Melnik, once proud of his sharp words and his displayed contempt, learned the hard way that power lies not only in what we say, but also in what we ignore. And Vladimir Putin, by completely ignoring him, had inflicted the worst punishment on him: silent annihilation.